The sun was setting over the savannah, casting a golden glow over the village of Mwamba. The air was filled with the sounds of children laughing, women singing as they pounded maize, and men returning from the fields. In the center of the village, under the shade of a massive baobab tree, sat Amina, the daughter of Nyota, the village healer. Amina was known for her sharp mind and kind heart. She had her mother's gift for healing, but it was her courage that set her apart. From a young age, she had stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, earning the respect of the villagers and the ire of those who sought to oppress them. Amina, her mother called, pulling her from her thoughts. "Come, it's time." Amina stood and followed her mother to the edge of the village, where the land stretched out in a sea of golden grass. Nyota carried a small pouch of herbs and a staff carved with the image of a bird, its wings spread wide. It was the symbol of the Firebird, a mythical creature said to bring justice to the oppressed. "The Firebird chose our family for a reason," Nyota said, her voice steady. "It saw the strength in our hearts, the fire in our souls. You, Amina, carry that fire within you. Never forget that." Amina nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had been invited to a gathering by her childhood friend, Zawadi, and though something felt off, she couldn't put her finger on it. "Be careful," Nyota said, as if reading her thoughts. "Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend." The gathering was held at Zawadi's family homestead, a short walk from the village. Amina arrived to find a small group of people gathered around a fire, laughing and talking. Zawadi greeted her with a warm smile, but there was something in her eyes that made Amina uneasy. "I'm so glad you came," Zawadi said, linking her arm through Amina's. "I've missed you." Amina forced a smile. "I've missed you too." As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew tense. The people at the gathering were not Zawadi's usual friends, and their laughter had a sharp, mocking edge. Amina was about to leave when Zawadi grabbed her arm. "Stay," Zawadi said, her voice low. "It's just getting interesting." Before Amina could respond, the door slammed shut, and the room was plunged into darkness. Amina's heart raced as she struggled to see in the dark. She could hear the men moving around her, their voices low and menacing. She tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth. "Don't fight it," a voice whispered in her ear. "You brought this on yourself." The next few hours were a blur of pain and fear. When it was over, Amina lay on the ground, broken and bleeding. She could hear the men laughing as they left, their voices fading into the night. Amina returned to the village the next morning, her body bruised and her spirit shattered. She avoided the villagers' eyes, afraid of what she might see. Pity, blame, disgust. Her mother was waiting for her when she arrived home. Nyota took one look at her daughter and knew what had happened. Without a word, she wrapped Amina in her arms and held her as she cried. "They tried to break you," Nyota said, her voice fierce, "but they forgot that you are the daughter of the Firebird, and fire cannot be extinguished." Days passed, and Amina remained in her hut, refusing to speak to anyone. The villagers whispered, some blaming her for what had happened, while others pitied her. But Amina's mother refused to let her daughter be defined by her pain. "You have a choice," Nyota said one morning. "You can let them win, or you can fight back." Amina looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "How? By standing up for yourself?" Nyota said. "By showing them that you are stronger than they could ever imagine." That night, Amina made her decision. She would fight back, not just for herself, but for all the women who had suffered in silence. The morning sun rose over Mwamba, its golden rays piercing through the thatched roofs of the village huts. Amina stood at the edge of the village, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The savannah stretched endlessly before her, a sea of golden grass swaying in the breeze. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. It was a new day, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "You carry the Firebird's spirit within you. No one can take that away." Amina clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She would not let them break her. She would fight back. Her first step was to gather evidence. She needed proof of what had happened, something that would force the village elders to take action. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies. Amina made her way to the hut of Kito, a young warrior known for his bravery and sense of justice. Kito had always admired Amina's strength, and she hoped he would be willing to help her now. Kito was sharpening his spear when Amina arrived. He looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. "Amina," he said, standing quickly. "Are you all right?" Amina shook her head. "No, Kito, I'm not. But I will be. I need your help." Kito listened intently as Amina recounted what had happened. His jaw tightened, and his grip on his spear turned white-knuckled. "Jabari," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "I should have known." "Will you help me?" Amina asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her heart. Kito nodded without hesitation. "Of course, whatever you need." With Kito by her side, Amina began her quest for justice. They started by visiting the homestead where the gathering had taken place. The place was deserted now, the fire pit cold and the ground littered with empty bottles and discarded clothing. Amina searched the area, her eyes scanning the ground for anything that might serve as evidence. She found a piece of cloth caught on a thorny bush, its fabric torn and stained. It was hers, a remnant of the dress she had worn that night. She held it up, her hands trembling. "This is proof," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Proof that I was here." Kito nodded, his expression grim. "We'll take it to the elders, but we need more. We need witnesses." Amina knew he was right. The elders would need more than a piece of cloth to believe her story. They needed someone who had seen what happened, someone who could corroborate her account. But finding a witness would not be easy. The men who had attacked her were powerful, and many in the village feared them. Amina and Kito would have to tread carefully. As they made their way back to the village, Amina and Kito were confronted by Jabari and two of his men. Jabari was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a cruel smile and eyes that gleamed with malice. "Well, well," Jabari said, his voice dripping with mockery. "If it isn't the Firebird's daughter. What brings you here, little bird?" Amina stood her ground, her chin held high. "I'm here for justice," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Jabari laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Justice? For what? You think anyone will believe you? You're nothing but a foolish girl." Kito stepped forward, his spear raised. "You'll regret those words, Jabari." Jabari's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure hatred. "You're making a mistake, Kito. This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Kito replied, his voice firm. For a moment the air was thick with tension. Then, with a snarl, Jabari turned and walked away, his men following close behind. Amina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Kito nodded, his expression serious. "We need to be careful. Jabari won't let this go easily." The next morning, Amina and Kito presented their evidence to the village elders. The council was held under the sacred baobab tree, its massive branches providing shade from the midday sun. The elders sat in a semicircle, their faces stern and unreadable. Amina stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She held up the piece of cloth and began to speak, her voice clear and strong. She recounted what had happened, sparing no detail. The elders listened in silence, their expressions growing darker with each word. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then Elder Mosey, the oldest and most respected of the council, spoke. "This is a serious accusation, Amina. Do you have any witnesses?" Amina hesitated. "Not yet. But I will find them." Elder Mosey nodded slowly. "Very well. We will consider your case. But be warned, Amina. This path you have chosen is a dangerous one." Amina and Kito spent the next few days searching for witnesses. They visited neighboring villages, spoke to traders and travelers, and even ventured into the forest where the outcasts lived. It was grueling work, and more than once they were met with hostility or fear. But slowly, they began to piece together the truth. They learned that Jabari and his men had a history of violence, and that many in the region feared them. They also found a young woman named Nia, who had been present at the gathering and had seen what happened. Nia was hesitant to come forward, afraid of what Jabari might do to her, but Amina's courage inspired her. "I'll testify," Nia said, her voice trembling but determined, "for you and for all the others who can't speak for themselves." The trial was held under the baobab tree. The entire village gathered to watch. Amina stood before the elders, her head held high. Nia stood beside her, her hands clasped tightly together. Jabari and his men were brought forward, their faces twisted with anger and defiance. The elders listened as Amina and Nia recounted what had happened, their voices steady and clear. Jabari tried to discredit them, his voice dripping with venom. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the elders could not ignore the truth. In the end, the verdict was clear. Jabari and his men were banished from the village, their names struck from the records, and their deeds condemned for generations to come. With the trial over, Amina began to heal. She started a council of women in the village, providing a safe space for survivors of violence to share their stories and support one another. Kito, who had grown close to Amina, proposed marriage, and she accepted, knowing that he respected and admired her for who she was. Together they worked to build a future where justice and equality were not just ideals, but realities. And as Amina stood before the village, her voice strong and clear, she knew that she had fulfilled the Firebird's legacy. The Council of Women began as a small gathering in Amina's hut. At first, only a handful of women came, their faces shadowed with fear and shame. But as word spread, more and more women began to arrive, each carrying her own story of pain and survival. Amina sat at the center of the circle, her presence calm and reassuring. "This is a safe space," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Here, you can speak without fear. Here, your voice matters." One by one, the women began to share their stories. Some spoke of abuse at the hands of their husbands, others of violence from strangers. Each story was different, but they all carried the same thread of pain and resilience. As the women spoke, Amina felt a fire growing within her. These women were strong, but they had been silenced for too long. She vowed to help them find their voices, just as she had found hers. Not everyone in the village was pleased with the Council of Women. Some men, threatened by the idea of women standing up for themselves, began to push back. They spread rumors, accusing Amina of sowing discord and undermining the village's traditions. One evening, as Amina and Kito walked home from a council meeting, they were confronted by a group of men. Their leader, a man named Dowdy, stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "You think you can change things?" Dowdy spat. "You think you can turn our women against us?" Amina stood her ground, her eyes blazing. "I'm not turning anyone against you, I'm giving them a voice, something you've tried to take away." Dowdy's face turned red with rage. He raised his hand, but before he could strike, Kito stepped between them, his spear raised. "Touch her," Kito said, his voice low and dangerous, "and you'll regret it." The men hesitated, then backed away, muttering curses under their breath. But Amina knew this was only the beginning. The road to justice would be long and fraught with challenges. That night, Amina dreamed of the Firebird. It appeared in a blaze of golden light, its feathers shimmering like molten fire. The bird circled above her, its eyes filled with wisdom and compassion. "You have done well, Amina," the Firebird said, its voice echoing like the wind through the trees. "But your journey is not over. There are still those who need your help." Amina woke with a start, her heart pounding. She knew what she had to do. The Council of Women was just the beginning. She needed to take her message beyond the village, to the surrounding communities where women were still suffering in silence. Amina and Kito set out at dawn, their packs filled with supplies. They traveled from village to village, spreading the word about the Council of Women and offering support to those in need. Their journey was not easy. They faced resistance at every turn, from men who feared change and women who were too afraid to speak out. But Amina's determination never wavered. She knew that every step she took brought her closer to her goal. In one village, they met a young girl named Zuri, who had been cast out by her family after being attacked. Amina took the girl under her wing, teaching her to read and write and showing her that she was not alone. In another village, they encountered a group of women who had formed their own secret council. Amina shared her story and offered her support, and the women welcomed her with open arms. After months of traveling, Amina and Kito returned to Mwamba. The village had changed in their absence. The council of women had grown, and the women were stronger and more confident than ever. But there was still work to be done. The men who had resisted the council were still a threat, and Amina knew that true change would take time. She called a meeting of the entire village, standing before the elders and the people with her head held high. "We have come far," she said, her voice ringing out. "But we cannot stop now. We must continue to fight for justice, for equality, for a future where no one has to live in fear." The villagers listened in silence, their faces filled with respect and admiration. Even the elders, who had once been hesitant, nodded in agreement. That evening, as the sun set over the savannah, Kito took Amina's hand and led her to the edge of the village. They stood under the baobab tree, its massive branches casting long shadows on the ground. "Amina," Kito said, his voice soft but steady, "you are the bravest, strongest person I know. I have admired you for so long, and I would be honored if you would be my wife." Amina's heart swelled with emotion. She looked into Kito's eyes and saw the love and respect he had for her. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding was a celebration of love and hope. The entire village came together to honor Amina and Kito, their joy a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. As Amina stood before the village, her hand in Kito's, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had faced darkness and emerged stronger. She had found love and purpose. And she knew that her journey was far from over. Years passed, and Amina's Council of Women grew into a movement that spread across the region. Women who had once been silent found their voices, and communities that had once been divided came together in the spirit of justice and equality. Amina and Kito had children, and they raised them with the same values of courage and compassion. The Firebird spirit lived on in their family, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would always come. And so the story of Amina, the Firebird's daughter, became a legend, passed down from generation to generation, a story of resilience, of justice, and of the enduring power of the human spirit. The story ends with Amina addressing a gathering of women from across the region. "They tried to break me," she said, her voice strong and clear, "but they only made me stronger. To anyone who has ever felt powerless, remember this. You carry the spirit of the Firebird within you. No one can take that away. Stand tall, fight back, and never let anyone dim your light."